Hello, everyone. Another book review from me, and I'm going to review a book um, called The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Okay, Niccolo Machiavelli. It's called The Prince. This book is a translation, very good translation, I have to admit, of a book that was written about 500 years ago. Now, why would you want to read a book that was written about 500 years ago, and why is it important? So, a bit of background. Um, Niccolo Machiavelli was a diplomat in Florence, Italy, about over 500 years ago. He was kind of like a diplomat, did some work abroad, and then wrote this book, The Prince, which was basically a book about politics and how politics really works. And he wrote this, and um, yeah, I mean, the first thing I was thinking was, why would you even read a book like this? Why would I even read a book like this? Now, weirdly enough, this book somehow ended up in my office. Somebody left it there, gave me a brand new copy, and I was going to Florence on holiday, and I thought, right, I'm going to read this. But the more I read it, the more I realized, the more I read about it as well, I realized that this is a book that has been around for 500 years. It's got an enormous influence, or had enormous influence on the world, and almost every politician worth his salt has actually read this at some point. And some of them may not admit to reading it, but they've probably all read it. But anyway, what is this about? So, a bit of the background history of this guy, Niccolo Machiavelli. He was basically a diplomat in Florence about 500 years ago. He he was Florence at that time was ruled by a family called the Medicis, and Florence had a group of Italy wasn't just one big country. It was a country but with lots of different states ruled by a king or a duke or something like that. And the family that ruled Florence were a group called the Medicis. Like I said, this guy worked for them and would then, go out on trips to France and other places, and knew about other people around, like the Turkish Ottoman Empire here, and various other people, and even the Germans. So he would be involved in that kind of lifestyle. It wasn't the most glamorous lifestyle. In fact, in the biography, it talks about how sometimes the diplomats didn't even have enough money to feed themselves, but he loved that lifestyle, and it was what he lived for. The Medicis eventually got knocked off, and who took over was a guy called Cesare de Borgio, who happened to be the son of the Pope, Pope Julius, I believe his name was. Now, um, he was writing this book, and what he was hoping was that he would get a job with them. And so he writes very kind of complimentarily about this guy, Cesare de Borgio. However, uh, he Cesare de Borgio got knocked off because the Pope died. So this guy lost his power, Cesare de Borgio, and then the Medicis came back in. There were a couple of Medicis, and he wrote this book almost as a kind of present or a resume saying, look at all my ideas about politics, and this could be useful for you. I'm not a rich guy, but I can offer you this. Unfortunately, the book was probably not even read by the Medici son that was in power at the time, but it was around in manuscript form. It didn't get published until after Machiavelli died, but when he did die and it was published and it gained this traction amongst people who read this, almost like a kind of secret, you know, book about real politics. And it became a huge kind of scandal, to the extent that the influence of this tiny book is just unbelievable. When we were reading it, I was thinking, could this even be true? So people would read this thing, and for example, the Pope banned it. He put it on his banned list. He called it written by Satan's finger. Um, but other people picked this up, and it was like for example, King Henry VIII picked this up, the prince, and said, "Look at this. Look how bad Catholics are. Look how bad the Pope is." So we're going to go and start up our own religion, Protestantism. Wow. To think that a book could actually have that effect. But it was because it was thought to be such a scandal that the King Henry VIII set up a new religion. Think of the effect that's had on the world and the wars and everything. On top of that, loads of other politicians have read this book. For example, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in Pakistan. Apparently, this is one of his favorite books. And the weird thing was that I talked to Pakistani guys of a certain age in their 60s and 70s, and they'd all read this book. And I talked to people who are a lot younger, they'd never heard of it. But these guys, old timers, had heard of this book and had read it as part of their college education. So even in Pakistan, all these politicians have actually read this book. I bet for most definitely people like Tony Blair, all these people will have read this book at some point. And some people say it's like the first book of, let's call it, political science that's ever been out there. Mussolini, all these people talked about it. Hitler talked about it. To the extent that I think there was a guy called, who is it? There was somebody that, Bertrand Russell, who's a British philosopher, he called it a handbook for gangsters. So that shows you. And when you read it, you think, is he talking about a Pakistani family or The Sopranos? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like reading this, it feels like someone in The Sopranos would have been reading this. So anyway, what's the big deal about it? What's the big scandal? So basically, Niccolo Machiavelli is somebody who thought that, listen, politics and religion are two different things. And that actually, if you're a good politician who survives, it has nothing to do with religion. In fact, you have to be a bad Christian sometimes to be a good politician. But this, he also said it's not important to be religious, but it's important to look religious, to show these qualities of generosity, humanity, and all these other things. But it's not important to actually be these things, but you have to be seen to be these things. So it was the first, and he said it without any remorse. He was saying it straight up. Listen, this is what you have to be to actually survive. And it's the first time anybody had really written that down and said, this is what you need to survive and to be a good, to survive. In other words, it's not important to be good. In fact, if anything, you have to be cruel sometimes to survive. And he talks about being cruel in short bursts. At the beginning, show your mark, kill people if you want. And he gives examples of people. There's a guy called Cesar Borgia in this, and he took on an administrator. The administrator was fantastic. And what does he do at the end of that? Once he'd done his work, he had his head chopped off and put him in the square. So he was showing everybody, I'm the boss. He talks about other people. Yes, he talks about cruelty in short bursts. Now you might think there was somebody else, and I'd written something down. He talks about he talks about somebody called Agothodes, who was by his efforts the head of the army, and essentially what he did was he gathered all the important men of the Senate of Rome at some point, and what did he do? He had them all killed. So he had them all killed. He was a treacherous man, but he used cruelty in short bursts. Now, you might think, well, that's all bullshit, doesn't make a difference. But I was reading something about the ruling family of Dubai. And apparently the ruling family of Dubai started off with one of the patriarchs, who gathered loads of people from the surrounding tribes to a big wedding. What did he do? He got up on the roof, shot them all as they came in, and ended up becoming the big leader of the ruling sort of clan in Dubai. And it's the same guy that's going on now. Does that make sense? Here's a thing I'm going to say, and this sounds very familiar. One of the chapters which I read, this is one of the chapters towards the end. A ruler must also show that he admires achievement in others, giving work to men of ability and rewarding people who excel in this or that craft. Rewarding people, a bit like the honours list. What's more, he should reassure his subjects that they can go calmly about their business as merchants or farmers or whatever trade they practice, without worrying that if they increase their wealth, they'll be in danger of having it taken away from them. Or that if they start up a business, they'll be punitively taxed. But like our conservative government, we're not going to tax the energy companies. On the contrary, a ruler should offer incentives to people who want to do this kind of thing and to whoever plans to bring prosperity to his city or state. Okay. Then at the right times of the year, he should entertain people with shows and festivals. And since every city is divided into guilds and districts, he should respect these groups and go to their meetings from time to time, showing what a humane and generous person he is, though without ever forgetting the authority of his position, something he must always keep to the fore. So he basically talks about the importance of keeping up appearances, but not actually being those things. And he talks about, basically, I've written some things here. He talks about when you take over a territory, a new territory, you should actually live in it to find out what it's like, and so that you can nip problems in the bud. Don't just take over a territory and just raze it to the ground. Set up colonies. Colonies, he thinks, are better and cheaper, and let the people go about their business. The question of, is it better to be loved or feared? I saw that in a movie once. Well, he talks about that. He's the one that posed that question. And he says, well, it's better to be loved because if people remember and are grateful to you, but most people are shits. So it's actually better to be feared because then they fear punishment and then they'll stay in line. So actually he thinks it's overall it's better to be feared because most people are shits. Okay. He does say don't be hated. Be feared, but don't be hated. And what's the best way not to be hated? Stay away from people's property and their women. And as long as you do that, you'll probably not be hated. And of course, he says it's better to be seen to be humane, loyal, generous, but you don't have to be able to change these things. You don't have to actually be these things. However, one important thing he does say is it's important to change quickly. And this is the big message of the prince: flexibility. You have to be cruel quick. But once you've got your message across, then you've got to be a nice guy and all that kind of thing. So changeability is one thing. You can't be nice all the time. You have to be cruel. It's important. And if you're going to be cruel, do it quick, in short bursts. Get it over and done with. Some bits here seemed very self-evident. Keep the people happy and satisfied, but don't drive the nobles to despair. It's a sensible ruler. He talks about some rulers that he really admires, like Marcus Aurelius. And then he talks about bad examples like Commodus. You remember watching that movie, The Gladiator? Marcus Aurelius is the guy at the beginning. Marcus Aurelius is an amazing character. He's one of the big examples of a philosophy called Stoicism, which I will talk about later because I picked up a copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And he sounds like a really sound guy who keeps his own emotions in check. A bad example is his son Commodus, who, even in the Gladiator movie, is shown to be a real shit and kills the gladiator, Russell Crowe, at the end. Anyway, the role of luck. Well, the role of luck, he says it's 50-50, but you've got to prepare. And if you prepare, you can weather things out when there's bad luck. So if you have banks and things, things set up along the course of a river to strengthen the river, it might not work fully, but it won't be as bad when trouble does happen. So the answer is prepare in prosperity to cope in adversity. Prepare in prosperity to cope in adversity. So there's some things that are funny. It's better to be impulsive than cautious. Fortune is female. If you want to stay on top of her, slap and thrust rather than be cold about it. Okay, right. Okay, I don't know what you think about that. But basically it sounds like put your mark on something. I'm not sure if I agree with that one. But then this was written 500 years ago, and I'm sure they thought differently about gender relations there. What else can I say about this? Some interesting things. He talks about having your own army, and it shouldn't be run by mercenaries. So there's a lot about how you keep a state, how the army should be. That's very interesting. I would say about this book, firstly, if you're going to get it, this is Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince. It's a new translation by Tim Parks. This one's published by Penguin Classics. I would say this is a really good one because it puts it into simple English. Fantastic. I think it's really, I think it's a well-written book. What can I say about this? Just to sort of round up. Basically, think what was scandalous about this is that Machiavelli basically said it as it is. He said, look, being good and Christian and all that kind of thing, or religious, is one thing, but you're not going to be able to rule. You can't be a lamb. You have to be a lion. You have to be cruel sometimes. You have to be changeable. You have to look religious. You have to look the part. Basically, playing politics, basically. That's what you have to do to stay on top of the game in terms of politics. And he wrote that, and he wrote it unambiguously. I think it's a shame he never even saw it published during his lifetime. But the incredible effect that this book has had on the world, I mean, it's incredible when I think about it. And like it or loathe it, you can't ignore this guy. He's had an enormous effect on the world. Even if you just take the one thing that people took it as a scandalous book, and this is what Catholics are like, and the Pope is really like. And remember, the Pope was a political leader. Those popes of the past were not just spiritual leaders like the Dalai Lama sitting in a cave or something somewhere. If even the Dalai Lama ever did, the popes were political leaders, controlled armies and the destinies of countries. So he, like it or loathe it, King Henry VIII looked at this book and went, you see, this is what they're really like. Set off on a new religion. That in itself is an incredible change to the world, whether you like it or not. And it's had an incredible influence for a good reason or a bad reason. The idea of the Machiavellian, even the word is now part of the language, Machiavellian politics, almost like real politics. Did he mean for this to be that? No, I don't think so. I think what he was trying to show here was, look, this is what the real world's like. This is what you have to do. I know what the real world's like, so give me a job. That's what this guy was trying to say, Niccolo Machiavelli. He was trying to look for a job with this, the last of with the family of the Medicis who'd come back into power. He wanted to get back into the political life, and unfortunately never did. Funnily enough, he did make success. He wrote other plays and things, but they were just family plays, and he did actually make enough success. But that's what he really wanted, to be back into the world of politics. Like I said, like it or loathe it, this is a guy you cannot ignore. His influence on the world has been incredible. Machiavelli is part of the language. The actual book itself is probably, I guarantee, it's been read by almost every person who wants to be a politician. Your leaders of your Labour Party, SNP, I bet they've all read this book. Okay, the people like in Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, all these people, Zulfikar, they've all read this book. Army leaders have read this book. It's a book I think it's important to read. You might read it and go, what's the big deal? But actually I like that. The best phrase I like is the one by Bertrand Russell. It's a handbook for gangsters. If you want to be like, just, rule, but that's all you're bothered about, then it's interesting to read. But I would read a translation, and this is a good one. Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince, translation by Tim Parks. What can I say? There's a lot in this, a lot to discuss. It's one of those things that, whether you like it or not, this is a guy you cannot ignore. It's he's had an amazing, incredible effect on the world. Never realized it because he died before it was even published, but it had a lot of infamy for centuries. And probably in the last 20th century, people have sort of thought, well, what was his real intentions? Interesting. Hope you enjoyed that. I certainly found this interesting, and it was an eye-opener in terms of what actually people, what is, maybe you can actually see it in the way that Western countries and even in now Eastern countries, how they work, how they think. They are thinking like this. They don't think like, oh, I'm being a nice, compassionate person. They think in a way that is Machiavellian. So from that point of view, I think it's really important to read. This has gone on for ages, but honestly, it's not a big book at all, but there's a lot in it. Okay, hope you enjoyed that, and see you all soon. Bye.